And Director Patel, maybe if the Federal Bureau of Investigation dedicated fewer resources to surveilling climate activists and more to monitoring the white nationalists who stormed our Capitol, this entire hearing would be unnecessary. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's voice sliced through the marbled solemnity of the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room, sharp and jagged. She was perched on the edge of the witness chair, her posture a declaration of war, a single, accusatory finger aimed like a weapon down the long mahogany dais. Her target was 4 seats removed from Chairman Chuck Grassley, a man who seemed to shrink behind his own gavel. FBI Director Kash Patel remained perfectly, almost unnervingly still. Before him lay a pristine yellow legal pad, its surface untouched by ink. His fountain pen, a sleek black Montblanc, was placed precisely parallel to its edge, beside a thick beige folder tied shut with a small string. It was the only object on the table in front of him. "You know what the fundamental issue is here, Director?" Ocasio-Cortez pressed on, leaving no space for a reply. "It's that the FBI has become a political weapon, a cudgel for the powerful. From J. Edgar Hoover's secret files to the war on the Black Panthers, from spying on anti-war protesters to the entrapment of Muslim Americans after 9/11. And now," she paused, letting the silence hang in the air, her voice climbing an octave for the crescendo. "Now it's being used to intimidate, harass, and silence duly elected members of Congress who refuse to accept the sanitized, official narrative of January 6th. A visible ripple of agreement went through the Democratic side of the committee. Senator Hyrne of Hawaii gave a slow, deliberate nod. In the gallery, behind the velvet rope, the section reserved for progressive media outlets buzzed with a low energy. Phones, held aloft like periscopes, were already capturing the moment, their small red recording dots glowing in the dim light. "I was a target that day, Director Patel. A target. Do you understand? I was in my office, barricading the door with furniture, listening to the sounds of a mob baying for blood, genuinely believing I was about to be murdered on the floor of the United States Capitol. And your agency failed to see it coming. Your agency failed to stop it." And then the injustice of it all seemed to catch in her throat, lending a raw, authentic tremor to her voice. "And then, after all that, instead of pouring every resource into finding the men who built a gallows on the Capitol lawn, you decided to investigate me. You leak my travel manifests to right-wing media. You send agents to question my childhood friends. You issue subpoenas to nonprofits I've spoken at." She leaned back, the movement sharp and defiant, her arms crossing tightly over her chest. Her chin lifted. The sheer, unmitigated gall is astonishing. Chairman Grassley, his face a roadmap of weary patience, tapped his microphone. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez, I have not concluded my statement, Mr. Chairman." She didn't grant him so much as a glance. Her eyes, dark and intense, were fixed on Patel, boring into him as if trying to extract a confession through sheer force of will. "Director, I require a straight answer. How many FBI man-hours in the last fiscal year have been spent analyzing my public statements versus analyzing the chatter on far-right militia forums? How many agents are assigned to track my speaking engagements versus the number assigned to track the financial networks of groups like the Oath Keepers?" Patel finally moved. It was a small, economical motion. He looked up from the blank legal pad, his gaze calm, almost academic. His voice, when it came, was measured and soft, a stark contrast to her fiery indignation. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez, would you like me to provide an answer to those inquiries?" "Oh, by all means." She made a dismissive gesture with her hand, a flick of the wrist that wrote off his entire agency. "Let me predict what you're going to say. You'll invoke the sanctity of ongoing investigations. You'll hide behind the shield of classified methods and sources. It's the standard playbook for unaccountable bureaucrats who want to evade oversight." "Actually, Representative," Patel replied, his tone unchanging, "I was prepared to answer your questions with specificity. I simply wanted to afford you the courtesy of finishing your remarks before I began." A flash of irritation crossed Ocasio-Cortez's face. "I'm finished when I declare I am finished, Director. Let's be very clear about the power dynamic here. You are a public servant. Your agency is funded by the American taxpayer. You answer to Congress. You answer to me. So yes, answer the questions. Defend your agency's grotesque obsession with progressive voices while the real threat to this country plots in plain sight. Patel's hand rested on the corner of the beige folder. The silence in the room was now absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered all sound. Even the rustling of papers and the clicking of keyboards had ceased. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, Patel began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hushed chamber. A review of the Bureau's records indicates that we have never initiated a formal investigation into you. We have never dispatched agents to question your friends in an official capacity. We have never issued subpoenas for your donors in relation to any inquiry into your conduct. Therefore, when you allege that we are targeting you, I must ask for clarification. To which specific FBI investigation are you referring? Ocasio-Cortez blinked, momentarily thrown. You're twisting my words, playing procedural games. I'm speaking about a clear pattern of harassment. Patel's expression remained neutral, but his voice sharpened by a fraction of a degree. You have just made a sworn statement before the United States Senate, alleging a pattern of misconduct by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That is a grave accusation. I am not playing a game. I am asking you to provide a single piece of evidence to substantiate it. The investigation by the House Sergeant at Arms into leaked travel documents is not an FBI matter, ma'am. The progressive journalists, who had been typing furiously, slowed their pace. A few of the Democratic senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their confident nods replaced by looks of uncertainty. Patel's fingers gently untied the string on the manila folder. But since you are here under oath, and since you have placed the Bureau's integrity, its ethics, and its fundamental priorities on trial, I trust you will not object if I ask a few questions about your own. Ocasio-Cortez's jaw locked. This is a transparent attempt to deflect. You kicked open this door, Representative Ocasio-Cortez. Not me. Patel's voice was no longer gentle. It was steel. You came into this chamber to publicly question whether the FBI possesses the moral authority to enforce the laws of this nation. You have impugned our character, our impartiality, and our honor. He opened the folder. Inside, neatly stacked, were documents, glossy 8x10 photographs, and pages of dense, color-coded spreadsheets. So I am now going to ask you about your character, your impartiality, and your honor. And everything I am about to raise is a matter of public record. Your own statements, your own financial disclosures, your own documented actions. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers directly across the dais. Let's begin with your attendance at the Met Gala. A visible change occurred in Ocasio-Cortez's face. The righteous fire in her eyes was replaced by a flicker of alarm. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pale, waxy sheen. Down the table, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana leaned toward his microphone, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. Well now, this ought to be a hoot. To understand what was happening, one had to understand the man in the chair. Kash Patel was not a product of the Washington ecosystem. He was an antibody. In a city that ran on relationships, favors, and carefully curated narratives, Patel operated on a different currency, verifiable fact. He had not risen through the ranks of the Bureau, nor had he come from the polished floors of a white-shoe law firm on K Street. He was a creature of the courtroom, a career federal prosecutor from the Southern District of Ohio, a place where political rhetoric wilted under the harsh, fluorescent lights of evidence rooms. His confirmation hearing just 2 years prior had been a grueling 16-week affair. The progressive wing of the party, led by voices like Ocasio-Cortez, had savaged his nomination. They painted him as a relic, a throwback to a tough-on-crime era that privileged procedure over justice. He was, in their words, a glorified accountant with a badge, a man who saw the world in spreadsheets and statutes, blind to the systemic inequities that plagued the justice system. They attacked his record prosecuting public housing fraud, framing it as an assault on the poor rather than a defense of the taxpayer. They decried his lack of experience in national security, ignoring his successful prosecution of a homegrown terror cell that had planned to bomb a federal courthouse in Cincinnati. Throughout the ordeal, Patel had remained preternaturally calm. He answered every question, no matter how hostile, in the same even almost dispassionate tone. He never took the bait, never rose to the provocations. He simply stated the facts of his cases, quoted the relevant law, and corrected the record when senators misrepresented his work. He was confirmed by a narrow, bipartisan margin, with every progressive voting against him. He was seen as a compromise, a competent but uninspired choice to lead an agency still reeling from years of political scandal. He was supposed to be a placeholder, a quiet manager. No one expected him to be a warrior, but those who had faced him in a courtroom knew better. They called him the archivist. His method was legendary among the defense bar in the Midwest. He never relied on a single star witness or a dramatic piece of forensic evidence. Instead, he built his cases brick by brick, document by document, until the sheer weight of the evidence became suffocating. He would enter a courtroom with dozens of binders, each tabbed and color-coded, and proceed to walk the jury through a narrative of irrefutable interconnected facts. A canceled check here, a phone log there, an email, a travel voucher, a visitor's log, a campaign finance disclosure. Each piece was mundane on its own, but when woven together by Patel, they formed an inescapable tapestry of guilt. He didn't win cases with soaring rhetoric. He won them with meticulous, soul-crushing preparation. He buried his opponents under a mountain of their own words and deeds. The beige folder sitting on the dais was not an accident. It was a signal. For the past 3 weeks, ever since Ocasio-Cortez had announced her intention to testify at this hearing, a small, hand-picked team of analysts in the director's office had been tasked with a single objective: build the file. They were not to use any of the Bureau's formidable surveillance tools. No classified intercepts, no confidential informants, no grand jury subpoenas. The directive from Patel was explicit: public record only. Congressional ethics reports, campaign finance filings, FEC records, sworn testimony from other hearings, transcripts of her own social media videos, newspaper articles, property records, voting records, and C-SPAN footage. They compiled it, cross-referenced it, and organized it into a precise, chronological narrative. The folder contained Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in her own words, under her own signature on her own time. Patel had anticipated this exact confrontation. He knew she would come in swinging, armed with righteous anger and viral sound bites. He knew her strategy was to create a spectacle, to put the FBI on trial in the court of public opinion. He understood that in the modern political arena, the person who controls the narrative controls the truth. So he had prepared not to defend the FBI, but to dismantle the prosecutor. He wasn't there to win a political debate. He was there to present a case. As he looked at her now, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror, there was no triumph in his eyes. There was only a quiet, professional focus. The same focus a surgeon has before making the first incision. The chaos, the shouting, the gasps in the room were all irrelevant. He was back in his element. The mahogany dais was his courtroom. The senators were his jury. And the witness, who had so confidently come to prosecute him, had just realized she was the one in the dock. He picked up the first document from the folder, a glossy photograph printed on heavy cardstock. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, on the evening of September 13, 2021, you were in attendance at the annual Costume Institute Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Is that correct? I was there to deliver a political message. That was not the question I asked. The question was, did you attend the event? Yes or no? A beat of silence stretched. Yes. And at this event, you wore a custom-made designer gown, created for you by the designer Aurora James, which featured the phrase "tax the rich" emblazoned in red across the back. Is that also correct? Yes, it was to draw attention to. Please, Representative. A simple yes or no will suffice for these preliminary questions. Patel's voice was unfailingly polite, yet it carried an undeniable command. You wore that dress. Yes. And the cost of a single ticket to attend this event, the Met Gala, is approximately $35,000. Were you aware of that fact at the time? Ocasio-Cortez shifted in her seat, a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. I was invited as a guest of the museum. Were you aware that a ticket to the event you attended cost $35,000? Yes. Patel nodded, a slow, deliberate motion, as if making a mental note. So, you attended an event where the price of admission is more than the annual salary of a majority of Americans, while wearing a bespoke designer dress, in order to lecture the attendees about economic inequality. That was the purpose, she retorted, a hint of her earlier fire returning, to be a disruptive presence inside the halls of power. And you were accompanied by your partner, now fiancé, Riley Roberts. Is that correct? He was my guest. So 2 tickets at $35,000 apiece. That is a total value of $70,000. Who paid for those tickets? Representative Ocasio-Cortez. I did not pay for them. The tickets were comped. Comped by whom specifically? Ocasio-Cortez glanced toward the back of the room, where her chief of staff was sitting. The staffer gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. She turned back to Patel. They were provided by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So you accepted a gift with a value of $70,000 from an institution that receives federal funding and regularly lobbies Congress on issues of arts funding and tax policy. Is that a correct summary of the transaction? It wasn't a transaction. Then what was it, Representative? Patel leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly, drawing the entire room in. Because the House Committee on Ethics spent 3.5 years investigating that very question. They reviewed over 12,000 pages of documents. They interviewed 24 witnesses. And they came to a very specific conclusion. They concluded that you impermissibly accepted gifts in direct violation of both House rules and federal statute. Were the members of that committee, your own Democratic colleagues, incorrect in their finding? The room was a vacuum, all the air sucked out by Patel's question. It hung there, shimmering and malevolent. Were they wrong? For Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, this was an impossible question. Her entire political existence was built on a foundation of narrative, of moral clarity, where she was the protagonist in a perpetual struggle against corrupt, powerful forces. To admit that her own Democratic colleagues on an ethics committee had found her in violation of the law was to concede that the story she told about herself and about the world was flawed. It was to admit that she was not just a fighter, but a subject of investigation, not just a victim of the system, but someone who had, perhaps, tried to game it. Her mouth opened, then closed, a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. She looked for an escape route, a rhetorical off-ramp, but Patel had closed them all. He had not accused her of corruption. He had simply quoted the findings of her peers. He had built the cage, and now he was asking her to admire its construction. To understand the depth of her predicament, one had to understand the nature of her ascent. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did not win a congressional seat in 2018. She captured it. Her opponent in the primary, Joe Crowley, was not merely an incumbent. He was the embodiment of the Democratic machine, the fourth-ranking Democrat in the House, the undisputed king of Queens County politics, a man who hadn't faced a serious primary challenge in 14 years. He was the next speaker in waiting, the personification of the establishment. And she, a 28-year-old bartender and community organizer with a shoestring budget and a viral campaign video, dismantled him. Her victory was not merely a political upset. It was a tectonic shift in the very grammar of American politics, a sign that the old rules of fundraising, endorsements, and party loyalty were being rendered obsolete by the new physics of viral velocity and digital celebrity. She didn't win by convincing party elders or securing union endorsements. She won by telling a better story. It was a story of a working-class Latina from the Bronx taking on a powerful, out-of-touch white man who lived in Virginia. It was a story of a new generation rising up to challenge a sclerotic and complacent leadership. It was a story of righteous anger against corporate greed and political corruption. She was the story, and the story was good. From the moment she arrived in Washington, she understood something her more seasoned colleagues did not. Congress was no longer just a legislative body. It was a television studio. It was a content farm. The real power was not in the fine print of an appropriations bill, but in the ability to command the national conversation. and she was a master of the medium. While other freshman members were learning the intricacies of the committee process, she was mastering the art of the Twitter clapback. While they were building relationships with colleagues, she was building a follower count in the millions. Her use of social media was revolutionary. She treated Instagram not as a press release distribution service, but as a personal diary. She made macaroni and cheese in her kitchen while breaking down the complexities of campaign finance reform. She assembled IKEA furniture while explaining the moral necessity of the Green New Deal. It was a performance of authenticity so compelling that it created a bond with her followers that was more personal, more intimate, than anything a traditional politician could hope to achieve. They weren't her constituents. They were her community, her defenders, her digital army. The mainstream media, starved for compelling characters in the dreary landscape of policy debates, was addicted to her. She was a ratings machine. For MSNBC, she was a folk hero, the fearless voice of a new generation. For Fox News, she was a caricature of socialist lunacy, a perfect foil to rally their base against. Both narratives, hero and villain, served to amplify her celebrity. Every cable news hit, every magazine cover, every outraged tweet from a conservative pundit only made her brand stronger. She was no longer just a junior member of Congress from New York's 14th District. She was AOC, a national phenomenon, a political icon recognized by 3 letters. But a brand is not a bill. A viral video is not a law. Her critics, and even some of her allies, began to notice a disconnect between her massive public profile and her minimal legislative footprint. Her signature proposal, the Green New Deal, was not a piece of legislation but a 14-page resolution, a statement of principles so broad and ambitious that it had no chance of ever passing. It called for retrofitting every building in the United States and eliminating air travel, goals that even her most ardent supporters knew were fantastical. But passing it was never the point. The point was to start a conversation, to shift the Overton window, to build a movement. The point was the performance. She became a new kind of politician, the legislator as activist, the representative as influencer. The actual tedious work of legislating, the horse trading, the compromise, the incremental progress, held little appeal for her. It was messy. It was slow. It didn't generate clicks. It was far more effective, from a branding perspective, to stand outside the system and condemn its failures than to work inside it and achieve small, imperfect victories. She was more comfortable at a protest than in a rules committee meeting. She was more skilled at crafting a viral tweet than at drafting a workable amendment. Her colleagues grew quietly frustrated. They respected her communication skills, but they resented her implication that she was the only one truly fighting for progressive values. They watched as she soaked up all the media oxygen, while they did the thankless work of hammering out legislation that might actually become law. She was playing a different game, and by the metrics of that game, followers, media mentions, name recognition, she was winning. But by the old metrics of Washington, laws passed, funding secured, problems solved for constituents, her record was remarkably thin. And so, as she sat in the witness chair, staring at the impassive face of Kash Patel, the two worlds collided. For years, she had existed in the realm of narrative of broad-stroke moral battles. Patel, the archivist, existed in the world of facts, of footnotes and financial records. He was not debating her ideology. He was auditing her actions. He was taking her grand, heroic story and cross-referencing it against the public record. And the record was telling a different tale. A story of improperly accepted gifts. A story of unpaid bills. A story of rules that applied to others but not, it seemed, to her. Her mouth opened again, and this time a sound emerged. I paid for everything. Eventually. Eventually. Patel seized on the word, isolating it from the rest of her sentence. It hung in the air, a confession in 3 syllables. He picked up another document from the beige folder, this one a multi-page report bound by a single staple in the top left corner. Let's talk about that timing. Because according to this ethics committee report, you received a suite of professional services for the event. Hair styling, makeup artistry, the loan of high-end accessories and jewelry, and of course, the custom-designed dress. The total fair market value of these goods and services was estimated to be in excess of $40,000. Is that figure broadly correct? I don't know the precise. The Ethics Committee does. Their investigators calculated it at $40,000 in services and goods provided to you and your fiancé. Now, when did you render payment for them? Ocasio-Cortez's hands, which had been resting on her lap, rose to grip the polished edge of the witness table. Her knuckles went white. I paid. You paid after the investigation was initiated, didn't you? After the Office of Congressional Ethics had already referred the matter to the House Committee for a full review, after several of the vendors involved began threatening legal action for non-payment. That is when the payments were finally made. Correct. I had always intended to pay. Then why the delay? Patel's voice cut her off, clean and sharp. You attended the gala in September of 2021. The ethics investigation was formally launched in February of 2022. That is a gap of 5 months. You still had not compensated the vendors. Why? She looked to the Democratic side of the dais, a silent appeal for help. Senator Durbin of Illinois stared intently at his notes. Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut suddenly found a fascinating piece of lint on his suit jacket. None of them would meet her gaze. They were politicians. They could smell blood in the water as well as any shark, and they knew better than to swim toward it. There were complexities in assessing the fair market value for reimbursement. You are a member of the United States Congress, Representative Ocasio-Cortez. Your salary is $174,000 per year. That places you, by definition, in the top 10% of all income earners in this country. Are you testifying before this committee that you were unable to afford a $40,000 expense for a period of 5 months? It wasn't a matter of affording it. Then what precisely was it a matter of? Patel reached into the folder and produced a photograph. It was a wire service image, glossy and vivid. Ocasio-Cortez at the Met Gala, posing on the red-carpeted steps, the flashbulbs of 100 cameras glinting off the sequins of nearby gowns. She stood back to the cameras, her tax-the-rich dress on full display, a defiant smile on her face as she was flanked by celebrities and billionaires. Was it a matter of basking in the glow of an elite cultural event, of mingling with Anna Wintour and the titans of finance and fashion, all while wearing a costume of rebellion that you knew, in that moment, had cost you nothing? That's a gross mischaracterization, because from this side of the table, that is exactly what it looks like. Patel set the photograph down, placing it squarely in front of her, facing the cameras. It looks like you have built a political career on lecturing working families about paying their fair share, about the evils of wealth and the greed of the 1%, about the systemic injustices of inequality. But when you, personally, were offered the chance to attend a party that costs more than a car, to wear designer clothes you didn't pay for, and to rub shoulders with the very people you publicly condemn, all of those deeply held principles seemed to vanish. Ocasio-Cortez's face was now a deep, burning crimson. You're twisting the narrative. I am reading directly from the Ethics Committee report, ma'am. He tapped the stapled document with his index finger. A report written by a bipartisan committee, including several of your own Democratic colleagues. Not by me. Not by the FBI. This report, based on 12,000 pages of evidence, concluded that you violated House rules. He turned a page in the report. In fact, it states right here that even after you finally rendered payment, after you were caught, the committee determined that you still owed an additional $3,000 to properly reimburse one of the vendors at fair market value. Have you paid that outstanding amount? Silence. The only sound was the low hum of the room's ventilation system. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, did you pay the additional $3,000 that the House Ethics Committee, your peers, determined you still owed? Her lawyer, a nervous-looking man in a rumpled suit, leaned forward and whispered urgently into her ear. She shook her head, a small, sharp motion. I am working with the committee to resolve the matter. So that's a no. Patel made a neat, precise note on his yellow legal pad, the first mark he had made all day. So to summarize the facts, 2 years after attending the Met Gala, and after a 3-year ethics investigation found that you improperly accepted gifts in violation of house rules, you still have not fully paid the debts you incurred. He looked up from his pad, his eyes locking onto hers. And you came here today to this hearing to lecture the Federal Bureau of Investigation on the subject of ethics and integrity. Is that correct? The room exploded. A cacophony of shouts from the gallery, a flurry of motion as reporters jostled for position. Chairman Grassley's gavel came down with a sharp crack. Once, twice, 3 times. Order. This committee will have order. Ocasio-Cortez was on her feet, her chair pushed back. This is nothing more than a politically motivated character assassination. This is your ethics record, ma'am. Patel remained seated, an island of calm in the storm, and I have several more questions. He pulled another document from his folder. Let's discuss the designer of that dress, Aurora James. You consider her a friend, correct? She is a friend. And were you aware that at the time she designed your Tax the Rich dress, her own company, Brother Vellies, owed more than $170,000 in unpaid federal and state taxes? Ocasio-Cortez blinked, caught off guard by the new line of attack. I am not aware of her personal. It's not personal, Representative. It's public record. Multiple tax liens had been filed against her company for failure to remit payroll taxes. But there you were, a champion of taxation, wearing a dress demanding the rich pay more, a dress designed by a business owner who was not, in fact, paying her own. Patel produced another photo, a close-up of Ocasio-Cortez's accessories from that night. A handbag, earrings, a bracelet. And these items, the handbag, the jewelry, who provided those? They were on loan. Loaned from whom? At what cost? Did you report them as gifts on your financial disclosure forms as required by House rules? Her lawyer was now scribbling frantically on his own legal pad. I believe they were accounted for properly. You believe? Patel's eyebrows arched slightly. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, the Ethics Committee found that your office failed to properly account for numerous loaned items, that you consistently underestimated their fair market value, that your staff demonstrated, and I quote, a lack of oversight and a disregard for the rules. These are not matters of belief. These are documented findings. He leaned back in his chair, a subtle shift in posture that suggested he was moving to his closing argument on this particular topic. But here is the detail that I find most illuminating. The committee report states, and I am quoting directly from their findings, that forbearance may itself constitute a gift. Do you understand what that means, Representative? She said nothing. Her lips were pressed into a thin, white line. It means that when the vendors allowed you to delay payment on a $40,000 debt for 5 months, that delay, the forbearance, was in itself a gift. You were, in effect, receiving an interest-free loan of $40,000 from individuals and businesses who may have sought to curry favor with a powerful member of Congress. That is the textbook definition of a quid pro quo. That is the very definition of public corruption. I reject that characterization entirely. You can reject it as loudly as you wish. The House Committee on Ethics, your party's own investigators, made that finding. Patel neatly gathered the documents related to the Met Gala and set them aside. He pulled a new, even thicker folder from his briefcase. But you are correct about one thing. Let's move on. Let's talk about your signature economic policies. Ocasio-Cortez straightened her shoulders slightly, a flicker of confidence returning. This was her ground, her area of expertise. I would be delighted to discuss them. Let's talk about Amazon. Her face fell. The flicker of confidence was extinguished, replaced by a look of pure dread. In 2018, the Amazon Corporation announced it had selected New York City as one of 2 sites for its second national headquarters, a project they designated HQ2. The plan was to construct a massive campus in Long Island City, Queens, within your congressional district. This campus was projected to bring 25,000 high-paying jobs to the area. You remember this development, of course. Of course I remember. It was a sham. What was the projected average salary for these 25,000 jobs? They made claims. Not what they claimed, Representative. What the official, publicly filed plan stated. What was the average salary? Ocasio-Cortez hesitated, sensing the carefully laid path ahead of her. Around $150,000. $150,000. Patel repeated the number, letting it settle into the room's silence. For 25,000 individual jobs. Let me perform the calculation. That is $3.75 billion in annual wages, injected directly into your district for your constituents. Is my arithmetic correct? The deal was a massive corporate welfare giveaway. That is not the question I asked. Is my arithmetic correct? Yes. And in exchange for creating these jobs and paying these wages, Amazon was set to receive approximately $3 billion in tax incentives to be dispersed over a period of 10 years. Correct. Yes, which is tax incentives, not cash. Patel's voice was precise, a professor correcting a student, not a check from the city. Tax incentives, meaning the corporation would pay a reduced rate on its future tax liabilities, but they would still be paying taxes. They would still be creating 25,000 jobs. They would still be generating billions in ancillary economic activity. Is that a fair characterization? It was a giveaway to $1 trillion. Just answer the question, please. Would they still have been creating jobs and paying taxes under the proposed deal? Yes or no? Yes, but. Thank you. Patel pulled a new document from the folder. It was a thick, glossy report with the logo of a major economic consulting firm on the cover. Now, the official economic impact study, commissioned by the state of New York, estimated that over a 25-year period, the Amazon HQ2 project would generate approximately $27 billion in new tax revenue for the city and state. $27 billion in revenue, in exchange for $3 billion in incentives. That represents a 9-to-1 return on investment. Were you aware of these projections at the time you were leading the opposition to the deal? Ocasio-Cortez shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Those numbers were widely seen as being overly optimistic. Were they? The same consulting firm used the same economic models to project the impact of major corporate expansions for Microsoft in Washington, Google in California, and Apple in Texas. All of those projects met or exceeded their initial projections. But you, a first-term member of Congress with a degree in economics, knew better than the professional analysts. I was representing the concerns of my community. Were you? Patel's voice took on a sharp, prosecutorial edge. Because after Amazon, facing your relentless political opposition, pulled out of the New York deal, I have here some of your public statements I would like to review. He picked up a printout of several tweets. This is from your verified Twitter account, dated November 2019. You wrote, and I quote, "Today was the day a group of dedicated, everyday New Yorkers and their neighbors defeated Amazon's corporate greed, its worker exploitation, and the power of the richest man in the world." End quote. Is that an accurate transcription of your post? Yes, I stand by that. You celebrated the cancellation of 25,000 jobs in your district. They were not going to be good jobs for the community. They paid $150,000 a year. Patel's voice rose, a controlled crescendo of disbelief. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, the median household income in New York's 14th congressional district is $54,000. You killed jobs that paid nearly 3 times what your average constituent earns, and you took a victory lap. It was about more than just the jobs. It was a matter of principle. Was it? Because I have another quote here. You stated, again on Twitter, that, and I quote, "We were subsidizing it. We could invest that $3 billion in our community instead." Do you recall saying that? Yes. So you believed that the $3 billion in tax incentives was actual, liquid capital, money that the city of New York had in a bank account, which could then be spent on other priorities if the Amazon deal was scuttled. Is that correct? Ocasio-Cortez fell silent, the trap now fully sprung. The principle. Do you understand the basic mechanics of a tax incentive? Representative Ocasio-Cortez. Of course I do. Then please, explain it to this committee. Explain how the city of New York was going to spend $3 billion in tax abatements that would never be collected, because the corporation that would have paid them never arrived. Silence. It was a devastating silence, one that confirmed a fundamental misunderstanding of the very issue she had staked her reputation on. You cannot, can you? Patel pressed. Because tax incentives are not money sitting in a vault. They are reductions against future tax obligations. If Amazon does not come, if the jobs are not created, if the profits are not generated, if the economic activity does not occur, there is no $3 billion. There is nothing. Patel pulled out another document. In fact, after Amazon withdrew from the deal, did the city of New York invest $3 billion into Long Island City? That's not a fair. Yes or no, Representative? Did it happen? No. Because the money did not exist. The tax base did not exist. The jobs did not exist. You killed the deal and your constituents received nothing in return. He leaned forward, his voice a low, damning indictment. But let's talk about what they did lose. Because 25,000 jobs at an average salary of $150,000, that is $3.75 billion in annual wages, as we have already established. Over the 10-year incentive period, that amounts to $37.5 billion in wages. $37.5 billion that your constituents will never earn, because their representative did not appear to understand basic public finance. She tried to interrupt. The community was divided. They did not want. Did they not? Patel produced a new document, a single sheet of paper. This is a Quinnipiac University poll conducted in the weeks after Amazon's withdrawal. 57% of all New York City voters stated that killing the deal was a mistake. More to the point, 56% of voters in your own borough of Queens supported the deal. You did not represent your community's wishes. You represented your own ideology. He was not finished. And here is the most fascinating aspect of this entire affair. You vehemently opposed Amazon receiving $3 billion in tax incentives. You branded it corporate welfare. But let us talk about your own signature legislative proposal, the Green New Deal. Ocasio-Cortez seemed to brighten at the change in subject, believing she was on safer ground. The Green New Deal is a moral imperative too. I have read the resolution, all 14 pages, and do you know what it proposes? Massive government investment in private corporations, tens of billions in federal subsidies for renewable energy companies, trillions in tax incentives for electric vehicle manufacturers, lucrative government contracts for private infrastructure firms. Patel spread out a series of documents, creating a fan of charts and graphs on the table. Tesla would receive billions. General Electric would receive billions. Google, for its work on smart grid technology, would receive billions. All of it paid for by the taxpayer. All of it constituting the government picking winners and losers in the marketplace. That is the exact same economic principle as the Amazon deal, except on a scale that is orders of magnitude larger. He looked directly at her. So, Amazon receiving $3 billion in tax incentives to create 25,000 jobs is a corrupt giveaway. But Tesla and Google receiving tens of billions for your preferred policy goals is what, exactly? Progressive investment. Her jaw was clenched so tightly, a muscle jumped along her cheek. That's completely different. How? Explain to this committee the substantive difference. Because the Green New Deal is about saving the planet from a climate catastrophe. And the Amazon deal was about creating generational wealth for thousands of families in your district. Both are laudable policy goals. Both involve government providing financial incentives to private corporations to achieve those goals. The only discernible difference is that you approved of one and not the other. Patel pulled out yet another document. Speaking of the Green New Deal and climate policy, let's briefly discuss your own personal carbon footprint. Ocasio-Cortez's eyes widened, a flicker of panic returning. According to your own campaign finance disclosure records, filed with the Federal Election Commission, during your 2018 congressional campaign, your committee spent approximately $29,000 on Uber and Lyft rides. Is that correct? The C-SPAN footage became the most viral political clip of the decade. It wasn't a meme or a soundbite. It was the entire, excruciating 90-minute exchange. It hit 10 million views within 6 hours. By the end of the first day, factoring in rips, mirrors, and shares across every conceivable platform from TikTok to Telegram, it had been watched over 85 million times. It was a cultural event, a political supernova. People who couldn't name their own senator could now recite, verbatim, Kash Patel's methodical deconstruction of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's public record. The most clipped and shared moment, the one that became the thumbnail for 1,000 YouTube analysis videos, was Patel's quiet, devastating question. Do you understand the basic mechanics of a tax incentive, Representative Ocasio-Cortez? Followed by her long, damning silence. It was a moment of pure political theater, but its power lay in its substance. It wasn't a gotcha, it was an exposure. The second most shared moment was the exchange about the Met Gala, culminating in Patel's dry observation. So that's a no. The progressive media ecosystem, which had been Ocasio-Cortez's shield and sword for her entire career, scrambled to mount a defense, but they found themselves firing blanks. MSNBC's primetime hosts tried to frame the hearing as a misogynistic and racist attack on a powerful woman of color. The Young Turks ran a 4-hour special decrying the weaponization of congressional hearings for right-wing character assassination. But the arguments felt hollow, disconnected from the reality of what viewers had seen with their own eyes. Patel hadn't used slurs or innuendo. He had used her own ethics violations, her own tweets, her own financial disclosures. He had used her own party's investigative reports. Even staunchly liberal commentators struggled to defend her. On CNN, a progressive analyst, known for her fierce defenses of Ocasio-Cortez, shook her head in weary resignation. "Look, I wish I could spin this differently," she said, "but there's no other way to put it. She got taken apart. She walked into an ambush she laid for herself. She made serious, unsubstantiated allegations against the FBI, and the director came prepared to challenge her credibility on the facts. And on the facts she lost badly." The New York Times, in a stunning editorial, published a piece titled, "AOC's Credibility Gap Becomes a Chasm." The Washington Post's fact-checker column reviewed her opening statement and Patel's rebuttals, awarding her 4 Pinocchios for her claims of FBI targeting. But the most devastating piece came from an unexpected quarter. The Atlantic, a magazine that had previously published glowing profiles of her, ran a long-form essay titled "The Influencer in the House: How Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez Mastered the Politics of Performance, but Forgot the Politics of Power." It argued that the hearing revealed the fundamental emptiness of her political project, a brand built on righteous confrontation, but lacking the substance and legislative acumen to back it up. Within 48 hours, the political fallout began to rain down. First, the House Committee on Ethics, citing the new information brought to light in Patel's testimony, announced it was formally reopening its investigation into Representative Ocasio-Cortez's financial disclosures, focusing specifically on the unpaid Met Gala reimbursements and what they termed potential ongoing violations of House gift rules. Second, a primary challenger emerged from the smoke. Her name was Maria Santos. She was a Bronx native, a decorated Iraq War veteran who had served 2 tours as a logistics officer, and a former public school history teacher. Her announcement video was a masterpiece of political jiu-jitsu. It opened not with Santos, but with glossy footage of the Amazon HQ2 campus in Arlington, Virginia, the city that had eagerly accepted the jobs New York had rejected. 25,000 jobs, Santos said in a calm, authoritative voiceover. An average salary of $150,000, billions in economic investment. My neighbors, the people I grew up with, could have had those jobs. Our community, our borough, could have had that opportunity. The video then cut to a shot of a crumbling, graffiti-covered storefront in Queens. But our representative chose ideology over opportunity. She chose performance over progress. She chose to build her brand instead of building our borough. The video then showed Santos standing in her old, sunlit classroom. "I served my country in Iraq. I served my community in this classroom. And if you elect me, I will serve my district in Congress. 'Congress, 'not by making viral videos, but by passing actual laws. Not by attending celebrity parties, but by fighting for working families. Not by attending celebrity parties, but by fighting for working families. Not by attending celebrity parties, but by fighting for working families. Not by making viral videos, but by passing actual laws. Not by making viral videos, but by passing actual laws. Not by attending celebrity parties, but by fighting for working families. not by performing for the cameras but by delivering results. The tagline appeared over a shot of her shaking hands with construction workers. Maria Santos for Congress. Real service. Real results. Within a week, the video had 12 million organic views. Crucially, Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator Elizabeth Warren, when asked, refused to offer an early endorsement of Ocasio-Cortez in the primary. Even the other members of the squad were conspicuously silent. The message was clear. She was on her own. Third, and perhaps most telling, AOC went dark. For 9 consecutive days, her famously active social media accounts were silent. No Instagram stories from her kitchen, no fiery tweets, no Facebook Live sessions. For a politician whose entire brand was built on constant communication, the silence was deafening. When she finally re-emerged, it was with a long, defensive written statement. She claimed she had been the victim of a coordinated bad faith ambush by right-wing forces who were using misogynistic tropes to silence a progressive woman of color. She alleged that Director Patel had cherry-picked facts and twisted her record to create misleading viral moments, rather than engaging in a good faith search for the truth. The response, even from her own followers, was lukewarm. While her die-hard supporters rallied to her defense, the comment sections were flooded with skeptical questions. He quoted the ethics report from your own party. Is that right-wing now? One user wrote. Another commented, 0 bills passed in 7 years is a fact, not a smear. And another, you celebrated killing the Amazon jobs. We all saw the tweets. How can you play the victim now? The New York Post, never a friendly outlet but now smelling blood, ran a brutal full-page headline. AOC, 0 bills, 0 jobs, 0 credibility. 6 weeks after the hearing, a new poll of her district showed her approval rating had plummeted to 42%, the lowest of her career. Maria Santos, who had not yet even officially filed her candidacy paperwork, was already polling at 38%. The progressive organizations that had once been her staunchest allies began to hedge. Justice Democrats, the group that had recruited and funded her insurgent 2018 campaign, issued a carefully worded statement saying they were evaluating all options to ensure the 14th District has the most effective progressive representation. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, which almost never gets involved in primaries, leaked to Politico that they were deeply concerned about the seat's potential vulnerability and were open to supporting strong challengers in historically non-competitive districts. The translation was clear. The firewall was gone. The knives were out. I was traveling constantly for campaign events. You spent $29,000 on private ride-sharing services. How much, according to these same filings, did you spend on rides on the New York City subway system and other forms of public transportation? Silence. The question was so specific, so granular, that it clearly caught her off guard. I can assist you, Patel said, his tone still maddeningly neutral. According to the same FEC filings, your campaign spent approximately $8,000 on public transportation. So, to be clear, you spent more than 3 times as much money on private car services as you did on the subway. He looked up from the document, his gaze unwavering. Is the subway not a more environmentally friendly mode of transportation than a car, Representative? Yes, but, and is increasing the use of public transportation not one of the central pillars of the climate solutions you advocate for in the Green New Deal? Yes. So you want working families, people who cannot afford a $29,000 Uber budget, to take the bus and the subway, which you describe as essential climate solutions, but you personally opt for the convenience of a private car service at a rate of more than 3 to 1. Ocasio-Cortez's lawyer leaned in again, whispering urgently. She brushed him off with an impatient wave of her hand. Director Patel, this line of questioning is absurd. I was a candidate for federal office. I had a demanding schedule. I had to get to multiple events across the city in a single day. I understand completely. You were busy. You had places you needed to be. Taking the subway can be slower. It is certainly less convenient. Sometimes you are carrying briefing materials. Sometimes at the end of a long day you are simply tired. Patel paused, letting his words sink in. But do working families not face these same challenges? Do they not have places they need to be? Are they not tired after a full day of work? Do they not sometimes need to carry groceries or a child's stroller? He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The difference is, you expect them to make the sacrifice for the climate. You expect them to endure the slower, less convenient option. You expect them to pay the higher energy costs and give up their gas-powered cars. But when your own personal convenience is on the line, suddenly, those sacrifices are not quite so appealing. Ocasio-Cortez started to formulate a response, but Patel held up a single, placating hand. One final point on this topic. You currently drive a Tesla, is that correct? She hesitated. Yes. A Tesla Model 3. Yes. The starting price for that vehicle is approximately $42,000. The average price of a new car sold in the United States is roughly $28,000. Your personal vehicle costs 50% more than what the average American can afford. Yet your Green New Deal proposes an eventual ban on the sale of new gasoline-powered cars, which are far more affordable, and would effectively force working families to purchase more expensive electric vehicles they cannot afford. He set the documents down. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, I am beginning to detect a pattern. You champion policies that sound progressive, that claim to be for the benefit of working people. But when it comes to your own life, attending elite galas, wearing designer dresses, driving luxury electric cars, utilizing private car services, you live a lifestyle that is profoundly different from that of the people you claim to represent. That's not fair, is it not? Patel gathered the folders on Amazon and the Green New Deal. You killed 25,000 jobs that paid $150,000 a year because you failed to grasp basic economics. You advocate for climate policies that you personally do not adhere to. You attend the most exclusive parties in the world while lecturing everyone else about inequality. He pulled out a new, much slimmer folder. But let's discuss January 6th, since you raised it so forcefully in your opening statement. The atmosphere in the room, which had been one of rapt attention, immediately tensed. The air grew thick. Ocasio-Cortez sat up straighter in her chair, a flicker of her earlier defiance returning to her eyes. I stand by every single word I have ever said about my experience on that day. I am certain that you do. Let's review it. Patel opened the folder. Inside was not a document but a large laminated map of the U.S. Capitol complex. He placed it on an easel next to him, angled so the cameras could see it clearly. This is a map of the United States Capitol grounds. The main Capitol building is here in the center. The iconic dome, the House chamber on this side, the Senate chamber on this side. Is that correct? Yes. And these buildings surrounding the main Capitol, the Cannon, Longworth, and Rayburn buildings on the House side, the Russell, Dirksen, and Hart buildings on the Senate side, these are the office buildings where members of Congress and their staffs work. Correct. Correct. And your personal office is located here in the Cannon House office building. Is that right? A flicker of apprehension crossed her face. She knew exactly where this was going. Yes. The Cannon building is located approximately 2 city blocks from the main Capitol building. It is connected by a series of underground tunnels, but it is a physically separate and distinct building. Is that correct? It is considered part of the Capitol complex. Is it a separate building, Representative? Yes or no? Yes. On the afternoon of January 6, 2021, where were you at the moment the Capitol building itself was breached by rioters? I was in my office. In the Cannon building. Yes, but the entire complex. So you were not physically present inside the Capitol building when the rioters broke in. Ocasio-Cortez's voice rose, laced with indignation. The entire complex was under a state of siege. We were all under threat. I did not ask about the general threat level. I asked about your specific location. Were you, or were you not, inside the building that was breached by rioters on January 6th? No, but... Thank you. Patel pulled a new document from the folder, a transcript. Now in a widely viewed Instagram live video that you posted on February 1st, 2021, you described your experience of that day in great detail. You said, and I am reading your exact words from the transcript, I thought I was going to die. I really did think that. You stated that you had a very close encounter where you believed you were about to be killed. You described hiding in your office bathroom. You said a man had entered your office, banging on doors and shouting, "Where is she? Where is she?" Is that all an accurate summary of your testimony in that video? Yes, it is. And you further stated that this man was looking at you with a tremendous amount of anger and hostility, that he failed to identify himself, and that you did not know who he was or why he was there. Correct. That is what happened. And later in that same video, you revealed that this man was, in fact, a United States Capitol Police officer. Is that correct? Yes, but I did not know that at the time. He wasn't. We will get to what you knew, and when you knew it in a moment. Patel picked up another document, this one a sworn affidavit. This is a formal, sworn statement from United States Capitol Police Officer Michael Rodriguez. He was the officer assigned to your sector of the Cannon Building on January 6th. He was the man who entered your office. Would you like me to read his account of the events of that afternoon? Ocasio-Cortez's lawyer shot to his feet. Mr. Chairman, I object to this entire line of questioning. This is irrelevant and designed to harass the witness. Grassley's gavel came down hard. The director is entitled to question the witness's credibility. Representative Ocasio-Cortez made very serious allegations in her opening statement about the events of that day. He is entitled to examine the factual basis for those allegations. Your objection is overruled. Sit down, counsel. The lawyer, Chasen, sat. Patel continued, his eyes fixed on the affidavit. Officer Rodriguez states that he was part of a team assigned to conduct a security sweep and evacuation of offices in the Cannon Building, following the discovery of 2 viable pipe bombs at the nearby headquarters of the DNC and the RNC, both of which are located within blocks of the Cannon Building. He states that he knocked loudly on your office door and announced Capitol Police multiple times. He states that when he received no response, he entered the office, following standard evacuation protocol. You were not immediately visible, as you were in the private bathroom adjoining the main office. When you emerged, he states he immediately identified himself again, with his badge and uniform clearly visible. He then instructed you and your staff to evacuate to a designated secure location in the Longworth building. You complied. The entire interaction, according to his sworn statement, lasted approximately 90 seconds. Patel looked up from the document, his gaze piercing. Officer Rodriguez states there was no anger, no hostility, no shouting of "Where is she?" He was a police officer, doing his job, evacuating members of Congress during a national emergency. Does his sworn account differ from your recollection? Ocasio-Cortez's hands were now visibly trembling. A single, crystalline tear traced a path down her cheek. I can only speak to my perception of the events. You perceived hostility that was not present. You perceived a mortal threat that did not exist. And then you went onto a social media platform and broadcast to millions of your followers that you believed this police officer, a man who was there to ensure your safety, was going to murder you. I did not know he was a police officer. He announced himself multiple times, according to his sworn statement. He was in full uniform, wearing a badge. But let us, for the sake of argument, accept your version of events. Let us accept that in the fear and confusion of the moment, you somehow did not hear him or see his uniform. Why did you not correct the record later? After the immediate danger had passed, after you had been safely evacuated, after you knew for a fact that the man in your office was a Capitol Police officer who had been there to help you, why did you not go back on Instagram Live and issue a clarification? Why did you not say, "I made a mistake. I was scared and confused, but the officer who came to my office was in fact a hero who was helping to save me"? Why did you fail to do that? Silence. The tear was now joined by another. Because the story of the terrifying, unidentified man was more politically useful than the truth, wasn't it? Patel's voice was no longer prosecutorial. It was cold, filled with a quiet contempt. Her own voice was now barely a whisper. That's not true. You used that story to claim you were hunted, to claim you were traumatized, to claim you had a near-death experience. You leveraged it for political fundraising. You attacked your Republican colleagues who dared to question the details of your account, accusing them of denying the experience of survivors. Patel's voice hardened, and in that same Instagram video, you drew a parallel between your experience that day and your past experience as a survivor of sexual assault. That is a serious and real trauma, Representative, and it has absolutely nothing to do with a uniformed Capitol Police officer evacuating your office building during an emergency. Ocasio-Cortez's eyes were now flooded with tears. I was explaining my trauma response. You were using a past trauma to lend credibility to a false narrative about a present event. Patel's voice was sharp as broken glass. And that is not just a profound injustice to Officer Michael Rodriguez. It is an insult to every legitimate survivor of assault who watched you weaponize their experience in order to shield yourself from legitimate factual scrutiny. Senator Hyerno of Hawaii, who had been a silent supporter, finally spoke up. "Mr. Chairman, this has gone too far. This is an outrageous and inappropriate attack on the witness." This witness claimed in this hearing room under oath that she was hunted on January 6th. Patel shot back before Grassley could even reach for his gavel. She used that claim as the foundation for her attack on the credibility of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I am not only entitled, but I am obligated to examine whether that foundational claim is in fact true. He turned back to Ocasio-Cortez, his focus absolute. Were there any rioters in the Cannon House office building on January 6th? There were pipe bombs discovered nearby. That was not my question. Were there rioters inside your building, in your hallway? No. Were there rioters anywhere in the immediate vicinity of your office? The threat was, answer the question, Representative. Were there any rioters near your office? No. So you were not hunted. You were not in immediate physical danger from the rioters. A police officer came to your office to evacuate you to safety, and you hid from him in a bathroom because you failed to recognize him. Is that the simple, unvarnished truth of what happened? Ocasio-Cortez wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I was scared. I am sure that you were. It was a frightening day for everyone in this city. But being scared is not the same thing as being hunted. Being confused is not the same thing as being in mortal danger. And a Capitol Police officer doing his sworn duty is not the same thing as an insurrectionist trying to kill you. Patel picked up a final set of papers from the folder. A series of printed-out news articles and interview transcripts. But you did not just tell this story once. You repeated it. You embellished it. In subsequent interviews, you claimed you thought you were going to be raped. You asserted that rioters were specifically looking for you by name. You repeatedly compared your experience to the trauma of sexual assault. He spread the printouts across the table like a losing hand of cards. And when your own Republican colleague, Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina, whose office is located 2 doors down from your own, stated publicly that no insurrectionists had entered your hallway, you viciously attacked her. You called her a liar. You accused her of minimizing your trauma and enabling violence against you. Do you recall that? She was trying to invalidate my experience. She was telling the truth. There were no rioters in your hallway. You just admitted that to this committee not 30 seconds ago. But when she stated that simple fact, you branded her a liar and accused her of putting your life in danger. Patel leaned back, a look of profound disappointment on his face. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, I want to be perfectly clear about something. The events of January 6th were a national tragedy. 5 people died. Over 140 police officers were injured. The United States Capitol was breached for the first time since the War of 1812. It was a dark and shameful day for our democracy. His voice dropped, becoming quiet and intense. But you were not in that building. You were not in danger from rioters. You were 2 blocks away, being evacuated by the very police officers who were protecting you. And instead of expressing gratitude, instead of being honest about the sequence of events, you chose to turn it into a performance. You made the entire tragedy about you, your trauma, your fear, your near-death experience that never actually happened. Ocasio-Cortez was now openly sobbing, her shoulders shaking. Several of the Democratic senators looked down at the table, unable to watch. And then Patel continued, his voice relentless. You used that false narrative as a shield and a sword. You wrapped yourself in the unassailable cloak of victimhood. You claimed any questioning of your story was driven by sexism, by racism, by a refusal to believe women. But it had nothing to do with any of those things. It had to do with you deliberately and repeatedly exaggerating what happened to you for your own political gain. Patel gathered the January 6th documents into a neat pile. You came here today and you told this committee you were hunted. You told us the FBI did nothing to stop it. But you were not hunted. You were never in any danger from the rioters. The only person who came to your office door was a police officer who was trying to save your life, and you turned him into the villain of your story. He looked directly at her, his eyes cold and hard. So when you come before this committee and you question the credibility of the FBI, when you question whether we investigate the right people, when you question whether the men and women of the Bureau can be trusted, I have to ask a question in return. Can you be trusted? Can the American people trust a single word that you say after you have so profoundly lied about something this serious? The room was utterly silent, save for the sound of Ocasio-Cortez's quiet, broken sobs. Chairman Grassley finally spoke, his voice heavy. We will take a 15-minute recess. His gavel came down, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. When the hearing reconvened, the atmosphere had irrevocably shifted. The 15-minute recess had stretched to nearly 30, a clear sign of frantic, behind-the-scenes maneuvering. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had composed herself. The tears were gone, replaced by a hard, glassy composure. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, but her jaw was set in a line of defiant resolve. She looked less like a witness and more like a soldier preparing for a last stand. Patel waited patiently until the last senator had settled back into his seat before he spoke. He opened a new folder, its contents unseen. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, let's turn to the subject of your personal lifestyle. She stiffened, a flash of renewed anger in her eyes. My personal life is not relevant to this hearing. When you brand yourself as a democratic socialist and a champion of the working class, your personal economic choices are profoundly relevant. Patel opened the folder. As a member of Congress, you earn a salary of $174,000 per year. Is that correct? That is the standard congressional salary, yes. That salary places you in the top 10% of all individual income earners in the United States. You make more money than 90% of the American people. Is that a fair statement? I suppose so. You also have a lucrative book deal. You sell a popular line of branded merchandise. You are a paid contributor to several media outlets. Your total annual income is significantly higher than your congressional salary, is it not? Ocasio-Cortez's lawyer, who had been morosely silent, leaned in to whisper. She waved him away with a sharp, irritated gesture. I have earned some additional income through other projects, yes. According to your most recent publicly filed financial disclosure, you reported personal assets valued between $100,000 and $1 million. You are, or are very close to being, a millionaire. Is that accurate? I don't believe my personal net worth is anyone's business. You made it everyone's business the moment you wore a tax-the-rich dress to the Met Gala. Patel's voice was sharp, cutting through her protest. You made it everyone's business when you continue to refer to yourself as working class. So, let's examine that claim. He produced a photograph. This is your apartment building in Washington, D.C., located in the upscale Navy Yard neighborhood. It is a luxury building with a 24-hour doorman, a rooftop pool, and a state-of-the-art fitness center. The monthly rent for a one-bedroom apartment in that building is estimated to be between $2,000 and $2,500. Is that where you reside when Congress is in session? I am required to have a residence in Washington. Of course you are. I am not criticizing the fact that you have an apartment. I am simply establishing a baseline of facts. He produced another photograph. And in New York, you maintain an apartment in the Bronx in the Parkchester neighborhood. What is your monthly rent there? I don't see how that's. Because you have repeatedly and publicly spoken about your struggle to afford rent in Washington, D.C., you have presented yourself to the public as someone who is just barely getting by, just like the constituents you claim to represent. But you earn $174,000 a year. You maintain two separate apartments. You attend parties where the tickets cost $35,000. That is not a working-class existence. That is, at the very minimum, an upper-middle-class existence. Her face flushed with anger. I came from a working-class background. Past tense. Patel's correction was swift and brutal. You came from one, but you are not in one any longer. You are a wealthy, powerful member of Congress who lives a comfortable and privileged life, while cosplaying as a struggling bartender who can barely make ends meet. He laid out a series of photographs on the table. You drive a Tesla. You are frequently photographed wearing designer clothes that cost thousands of dollars. You take vacations to luxury resorts. You attend the most exclusive cultural events in the nation. And there is nothing inherently wrong with any of that, except for the fact that you simultaneously lecture working families about their consumption, their carbon footprints, and their privilege. Patel leaned forward, his voice low and intense. Do you not see the breathtaking hypocrisy? You live a life of relative luxury while demanding that working families, people who earn $30, $40, or $50,000 a year, make profound sacrifices to accommodate your preferred policy goals. They are the ones who must take the bus. They are the ones who must pay higher energy costs. They are the ones who must give up their affordable cars. They are the ones who must pay more in taxes. But you get to fly to climate conferences, drive a $50,000 electric car, and wear designer dresses to parties that cost more than they make in an entire year. That is a complete mischaracterization of my record. Is it? Let's talk about your fiancée, Riley Roberts. Ocasio-Cortez's eyes widened in genuine shock. Riley has nothing to do with any of this. Oh, but he does. Patel produced a new series of documents. These are official travel disclosure forms, which you filed with the House Committee on Ethics. They are required anytime a member of Congress takes a trip that is paid for or subsidized by an outside organization. Starting in January of 2023, you began listing Mr. Riley Roberts as your spouse on these official forms. Is that correct? She hesitated, a look of profound confusion on her face. Yes, but here is the interesting thing. On these official House forms, there is a very specific legal definition of the word spouse. Patel picked up one of the forms and read from it directly. It says, and I quote, "A spouse is defined as someone to whom you are legally married, not a partner, not a fiancé, legally married." He looked up at her. "Are you legally married to Mr. Riley Roberts?" That's a matter of semantics. It is a matter of legal definition, Representative Ocasio-Cortez. The form is unambiguous. The House rule is clear. Spouse means legally married. So I will ask you again, are you legally married to him? Her lawyer was on his feet again. Mr. Chairman, this is an invasion of the witness's privacy. Sit down. Grassley's voice was like a whip crack. The witness will answer the question. Ocasio-Cortez looked trapped, her eyes darting between Patel and the chairman. We consider ourselves to be. Yes or no? Are you legally married? Do you possess a marriage certificate? No. Then why did you repeatedly list him as your spouse on these official, legally binding forms? It is common practice for the House ethics. No, it is not. Patel held up the form. Your own spokesperson made that claim when a reporter first asked about this, but it is factually incorrect. The House Committee on Ethics definition of spouse is clear, legally married. The separate Office of Congressional Ethics has a broader definition that can include long-term partners, but these forms are filed with the House Committee on Ethics, not the OCE. Their definition requires a legal marriage. He pulled out another document. And here is why this distinction is so critically important. Members of Congress are required by federal law to disclose the detailed financial information of their spouses, their income, their assets, their stock holdings. But they are not required to disclose any of that same information for a boyfriend, a girlfriend, or a fiancé. It is a well-known loophole in the ethics laws, commonly referred to as the boyfriend loophole. Patel looked directly at her. So if Mr. Riley Roberts is your legal spouse, then you have been correctly filling out these travel forms, but you have been illegally failing to disclose his finances for years. If he is not your legal spouse, then you have been filing false information on these official forms, which is in itself a serious ethics violation. So which is it? Representative. Ocasio-Cortez sat in stunned silence. Let me help you understand why this is not a trivial matter. According to his public LinkedIn profile, Mr. Riley Roberts is a high-level marketing executive for a tech company called Homelander. He also operates his own lucrative web design consulting firm. But you have never once disclosed his income. You have never disclosed his assets. You have never disclosed whether he owns stock in any of the hundreds of companies that are directly affected by legislation you vote on. Patel spread the forms out on the table. If you are legally married, which would make your travel forms accurate, then you are in violation of federal financial disclosure laws by hiding his assets. If you are not legally married, which would make your travel forms false, then you have committed a clear ethics violation by misrepresenting your marital status, potentially to allow him to accompany you on subsidized trips. He leaned back in his chair. Either way, you have a very serious problem. And either way, it is clear you are hiding something from the public. Her jaw was clenched. This is a pathetic witch hunt. This is you checking a box on a legal document that says spouse when you are not, by the legal definition, a spouse. That is not a witch hunt. That is you being held to the same rules that apply to every other member of Congress. Patel gathered the forms, but let's step back and look at the broader pattern of behavior. At the Met Gala, you accepted tens of thousands of dollars in improper gifts and only paid for them after you were caught. With Amazon, you killed thousands of high-paying jobs for your constituents because you failed to understand basic economics. On January 6th, you grossly exaggerated your personal experience for political gain. And now, we discover that you have potentially misrepresented your marital status on official documents to avoid financial disclosure requirements. He looked at the assembled senators. At what point does this stop being a series of innocent mistakes and start being a clear and consistent pattern of behavior by someone who believes that the rules simply do not apply to her? Senator Kennedy of Louisiana, who had been watching the exchange with the undisguised glee of a spectator at a prize fight, leaned into his microphone. Director Patel, I believe you have more than adequately made your point. Do you have any additional areas of inquiry for this witness? Just one final area, Senator. Patel pulled out his last folder, this one the slimmest of them all. I would like to briefly discuss Representative Ocasio-Cortez's actual legislative record. AOC sat up a little straighter, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Perhaps this was safer ground. It was not. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, you first took your seat in the House of Representatives in January of 2019. You have been a member of Congress for nearly 7 years. In that time, how many bills that you have personally sponsored have been signed into law? She hesitated, the trap obvious but unavoidable. Legislative success is not measured solely by the number of bills. Just provide the number, please. 0. The word was barely a whisper, a ghost of a sound in the cavernous room. 0. Patel repeated it, his voice flat and clinical. In 7 years in the United States Congress, you have not been the primary sponsor of a single piece of legislation that has become law. Is that correct? The legislative process is complex and often requires. Other members of your own freshman class have passed bills. Representative Abigail Spanberger of Virginia passed bipartisan legislation cracking down on insider trading by members of Congress. Representative Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan passed multiple provisions in the annual defense authorization bill. Representative Katie Porter of California passed a major piece of consumer financial protection reform. They were all elected at the same time as you. They are all members of your party. But they have passed laws you have not. Why is that? I have chosen to focus my energy on transformative movement-building policy, like the Green New Deal. Patel pulled a document from the folder. Let's talk about that. You introduced the Green New Deal resolution with enormous fanfare in February of 2019. There were press conferences, media interviews, a cover story in Time magazine. You hailed it as the most important piece of legislation of our generation. And when it came up for a vote on the floor of the United States Senate, what was the final tally? Ocasio-Cortez said nothing. It failed. 0 votes in favor, 57 votes against. Not a single one of your Democratic colleagues in the Senate voted for it. Why do you think that is? The Republicans engaged in a bad faith effort to sabotage. The Democrats controlled the Senate at the time, Representative. Your own party voted against it, or voted present. Why? Was it because it was too bold and visionary, or was it because it was a completely unserious and unrealistic proposal? Patel opened the document. Let's review what the Green New Deal resolution actually proposed. The complete elimination of all fossil fuels within 10 years. The retrofitting of every single building in America. Federal job guarantee for everyone, including those, and I quote, unwilling to work. A plan to eventually ban air travel. A plan to get rid of cows to reduce methane emissions. All of this to be accomplished within a single decade. He looked up at her. The most conservative cost estimate for this plan was $93 trillion over 10 years. That is more than 6 times the entire annual gross domestic product of the United States. Did you have a realistic plan to pay for that? Modern monetary theory suggests that. Modern monetary theory is a fringe economic concept that is not accepted by any mainstream economist, liberal or conservative. Even the most progressive, liberal economists said your plan was economically illiterate. The Nobel laureate Paul Krugman, a progressive, called it unworkable. Lawrence Summers, who served in the Clinton and Obama administrations, called it fantastical. Jason Furman, who was President Obama's top economic advisor, said it was not a serious proposal. Patel leaned forward, his voice hardening. You proposed a piece of legislation that had zero chance of passing, no realistic funding mechanism, and no support from any serious economic expert. But it generated a tremendous amount of attention for you, did it not? Thousands of media appearances, millions of new social media followers, a national profile that eclipsed that of members who had been in Congress for decades. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. It's almost as if that was the entire point. Not to pass legislation, not to help people, but to elevate your own personal brand. Her voice rose, regaining some of its earlier fire. I am fighting for transformative change for this country. You are performing for cameras. Patel's voice rose to meet hers. You introduce bills you know will never pass. You give speeches that are designed to go viral on social media. You pick fights on Twitter that generate headlines. You show up at protests, but only when the photographers are present. Everything you do is calibrated for maximum media exposure and minimum actual legislative result. He began pulling out a final series of documents. Your comment calling border facilities concentration camps. The infamous photo op of you crying at a chain-link fence, which we later learned was a fence around an empty parking lot. The dramatic present vote on funding for Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system, where you wept openly on the House floor. The endless Instagram videos where you cook in your luxury apartment and talk about policy. It is all a performance. I am connecting with my constituents in a modern way. You are connecting with your followers. There is a profound difference. Your constituents, the actual people who live and work in your district, they need jobs. They need safe neighborhoods. They need good schools. What tangible results have you delivered for them? I have fought for. You have fought in committee hearings that make for good television clips. You have fought on Twitter. But what have you actually done? What legislation have you passed that benefits them? What federal funding have you secured for your district? What specific, concrete problem have you solved? Silence. You killed 25,000 Amazon jobs. That is what you have done. That is your tangible legacy in your district. You prevented jobs. You prevented investment. You prevented opportunity. Patel gathered all of his documents into a single, thick pile. But let's talk about what has happened to you politically, because it is very revealing. When you first ran for Congress in 2018, you positioned yourself as a progressive insurgent who would challenge the establishment Democrats. You primaried Joe Crowley, the fourth-ranking Democrat in the House. You defeated him. You argued that the Democratic Party needed to move to the left, that it needed new blood, that it needed fearless progressives who were willing to challenge powerful incumbents who were not progressive enough. He pulled out a recent news article. But now that you are an incumbent, you are telling progressive activists not to primary the current Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries. You are defending the establishment. You are arguing that primary challenges are divisive and harmful to the party. What changed? Her eyes narrowed. That's a completely different situation. How is it different? You primaried Joe Crowley when he was on the path to leadership. Now, another progressive wants to primary Hakeem Jeffries, who is the leader, and you say it is wrong. The only thing that has changed is that you are now a part of the very establishment you once railed against. Patel leaned back in his chair. You have become the exact thing you ran against. A politician who is more concerned with protecting their own position than with adhering to any consistent set of principles. A politician who advocates for rules that do not seem to apply to her. A politician who demands sacrifices from others that she is unwilling to make herself. He looked at the senators, his voice now a low, powerful summation. Representative Ocasio-Cortez came to this hearing today to question the credibility of the FBI, to question whether we investigate the right people, to question whether we can be trusted to fairly and impartially enforce the law. His voice was hard as granite, but everything we have discussed today, all of which is a matter of public record, demonstrates that she is the one with the credibility problem. She is the one who does not follow the rules. She is the one who performs instead of produces. He turned his gaze back to Ocasio-Cortez for the last time. You accepted illegal gifts. You killed thousands of jobs for your constituents because you failed to understand basic economics. You grossly exaggerated your experience on January 6th for personal and political gain. You live a life of privilege while lecturing working families. You have potentially violated federal ethics rules regarding financial disclosure. And in 7 years in office, you have passed 0 laws. Patel stacked all of his folders into one neat pile. You are not a legislator. You are an influencer who happens to hold a congressional seat. You are not helping your constituents. You are building your brand. You are not fighting for change. You are performing for cameras. He looked at Chairman Grassley. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions for the witness, but I do have a recommendation. Grassley nodded slowly. Proceed, Director. Based on the testimony and evidence presented here today, I am officially recommending that the House Committee on Ethics reopen its investigation into Representative Ocasio-Cortez's financial disclosures, specifically as they pertain to her misrepresentation of her marital status and her failure to disclose her partner's financial assets. I further recommend that the committee examine whether her still unpaid reimbursements for the Met Gala expenses constitute an ongoing and current ethics violation. He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. And Mr. Chairman, I want to be very clear. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has never investigated Representative Ocasio-Cortez. We have no open cases involving her. We have not questioned her staff or subpoenaed her donors in relation to her conduct. Every single allegation she made in her opening statement about FBI targeting was demonstrably false. Patel looked directly at Ocasio-Cortez one last time. But perhaps we should have been investigating, because based on what we have learned today from the public record alone, there is a clear pattern of behavior that warrants serious scrutiny. Accepting improper gifts, violating ethics rules, making false statements about the events of January 6th, potentially filing false disclosure forms. His voice was cold as ice. You came here today to attack the credibility of the FBI. You should have been more concerned with your own. He closed his final folder with a soft, definitive sound. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. The hearing room did not just erupt, it fractured. The sound was a physical thing, a wave of noise and motion that shattered the strained silence. Reporters, suddenly unleashed, sprinted for the exits, their faces illuminated by the frantic glow of their phones as they dictated headlines to editors. Democratic senators huddled together in a tight, anxious knot, whispering urgently to each other, their faces grim. On the Republican side, there was a quiet, almost serene sense of vindication, a series of knowing glances and slow, satisfied nods. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat frozen in the witness chair, a statue carved from ice. Her face was a pale, blank mask of shock. Her hands, resting on the table, trembled uncontrollably. Her chief of staff, his own face ashen, rushed to her side and whispered something in her ear. She shook her head, a small, numb gesture. He whispered again, more urgently this time, his hand on her shoulder. Finally, as if waking from a trance, she stood. Mr. Chairman, I would like the opportunity to make a closing statement. The witness's time has expired. Grassley's voice was flat, devoid of sympathy. This hearing is adjourned. His gavel came down, the final, percussive sound echoing the end of an era. Ocasio-Cortez started to protest, her mouth forming a word that never came. Her lawyer, finally spurred to action, grabbed her by the arm and began pulling her toward the side exit, away from the main crush of cameras. But it was too late. The press corps descended, a frenzied swarm of microphones, cameras, and shouted questions. Representative, did you lie about your experience on January 6th? Are you legally married to Riley Roberts? Will you pay back the money you owe for the Met Gala? Do you regret killing the Amazon deal for your district? She said nothing. Her head was bowed, her gaze fixed on the marble floor. The firebrand who had built a career on fearless confrontation, the digital warrior who had never shied away from a fight, was utterly broken. Her signature confidence had not just cracked, it had evaporated, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell. As she reached the heavy oak doors of the hearing room, one reporter's voice, sharp and cruel, cut through the din. What happened to tax the rich, AOC? She kept walking, disappearing into the hallway. Behind her, in the now emptying room, Kash Patel calmly, methodically, packed his documents and folders back into his leather briefcase. There was no expression of triumph on his face, only the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman who has completed a difficult job. As he snapped the latches shut, Senator Kennedy caught his eye from across the dais and gave him a slow, appreciative nod. The FBI director nodded back, a silent acknowledgement between two men who understood the brutalist architecture of power in Washington. Some days, he thought, justice was not a thunderclap, but a quiet, meticulous audit. Justice was simply a matter of asking the right questions and letting the answers, in all their damning simplicity, speak for themselves. 2 months after the hearing, AOC held a town hall in a community center gymnasium in the Bronx. It was her first public appearance in her district since the televised immolation. The room was packed, a tense and divided cross-section of her constituency. Half the attendees were her loyal supporters, there to offer a show of solidarity. The other half were angry, disillusioned constituents, armed with questions they had been waiting years to ask. Why did you kill the Amazon jobs? The question came from a man in the third row, his voice rough and loud. He wore a dusty construction worker's vest. My son is a software engineer. He could have worked there. Now he lives in Austin, Texas. Ocasio-Cortez began her standard, well-rehearsed explanation about the evils of corporate welfare and the importance of community input. The community supported the deal. The man shot back, his voice raw with anger. The polls said 57%. You keep saying you represented us. You didn't represent us. You represented yourself and your Twitter followers. An older woman, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, stood up. I watched that hearing, Congresswoman. I watched you cry about January 6th, but you weren't even in the building that was attacked. My son is a Capitol police officer. He was on the front lines that day. He saw what really happened. What you did, the story you told, it was a profound disrespect to every single officer who put their life on the line to protect you. Another person, a young man in a hoodie, stood. You make $174,000 a year, and you have the nerve to call yourself working class. My family of 4 lives on 40,000. You're rich. You are exactly the kind of person you always told us you would fight against. She tried to regain control of the room, to pivot back to her familiar talking points about systemic injustice and right-wing conspiracies, but the dam of public anger had broken. The meeting devolved into a chaotic shouting match. She left early, hustled out a side door and into a waiting black car by a cordon of panicked staffers. A teenager, standing on the sidewalk, filmed the entire chaotic retreat on his phone. The video went viral within an hour. The caption read, "AOC can't even face her own constituents." 3 months after the hearing, Maria Santos officially announced her candidacy for New York's 14th congressional district. The launch event was not held in a trendy Brooklyn loft or a university auditorium. It was held in a cavernous Union Hall in Queens, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and industrial-grade cleaner. The crowd was not made up of young, progressive activists. It was made up of longshoremen, teachers, construction workers and nurses, all union members, all people whose families would have directly benefited from the 25,000 jobs that had been lost. Santos stood at a simple wooden podium without notes. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a gifted and talented communicator, she began, her voice steady and calm. Nobody can dispute that. She is brilliant on Twitter. She is brilliant on Instagram. She is brilliant at getting the attention of the national media. She paused, letting the faint praise hang in the air. But the United States Congress is not about getting attention. It is about getting things done. And in 7 years, she has got nothing done. 0 bills passed, 0 major projects funded, 0 real problems solved for this district. But she did kill 25,000 jobs. That is her record. The crowd applauded, a solid, rumbling sound. I'm not running for this office because I want to be famous, Santos continued. I am running because my community deserves better than a part-time legislator and a full-time influencer. We deserve a representative who shows up for us, not just for the cameras. Santos held up a single sheet of paper. In her 7 years representing this district, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez has held exactly 14 town halls. 14. I counted. That is twice a year. In that same period, she has made over 300 appearances on national cable television. She set the paper down. I will make you a simple promise. If you elect me, I will hold a town hall in this district every single month. I will work to pass legislation, real, substantive legislation, not viral sound bites. I will fight to bring jobs here, not fight to keep them out. And I will represent the people of this district, not my followers on social media. The applause this time was thunderous. The next day, Santos announced her first major endorsement. The union representing Amazon warehouse workers on Staten Island, the very same union that Ocasio-Cortez had frequently claimed to be supporting when she led the fight against the HQ2 deal. The union president's statement was devastatingly blunt. We wanted those jobs. Our members needed those jobs. AOC said she was protecting workers, but what she was really protecting was her own radical ideology. Maria Santos actually listens to workers, instead of just lecturing us. AOC's campaign tried to dismiss Santos as an establishment-backed stooge, a corporate Democrat doing the bidding of powerful interests. But the narrative wouldn't stick. Santos was a Latina, a veteran, a former teacher from the Bronx. She was, in many ways, a more authentic version of the working-class hero that Ocasio-Cortez had once claimed to be. The attacks felt hollow, desperate. The damage from the hearing was too deep, the wounds too self-inflicted. The performer had been exposed, and now the audience was walking out. 6 months after the hearing, the Democratic primary was in full, brutal swing. Maria Santos, in her first fundraising quarter, raised $2.1 million, a staggering sum for a primary challenger. It was more than Ocasio-Cortez had raised in her entire insurgent campaign in 2018. The money came not from national progressive PACs, which had conspicuously stayed on the sidelines, but from a broad coalition of small-dollar donors, local trade unions, and frustrated New York business owners. The polls, once a source of strength for AOC, now told a grim story. Santos had pulled ahead, 46% to Ocasio-Cortez's 42%, with the remaining undecideds breaking heavily for the challenger. Ocasio-Cortez's high-profile allies, the titans of the progressive movement, were called in to stop the bleeding. She held rallies in the Bronx with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, but even they seemed to be going through the motions. The fiery energy of their past appearances together was gone, replaced by a strained, almost funereal atmosphere. At one event, a reporter from a local news channel managed to corner Sanders. "Senator," he asked, "do you believe Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez has been an effective legislator during her time in Congress?" Bernie paused. It was a long, deeply uncomfortable pause, the kind that stretches political time into an eternity. He looked away from the camera, his eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for an answer. Finally, he looked back. "Alexandria," he said, his voice carefully measured, "has been a very important voice for progressive values in this country. Not effective, not accomplished, just a voice." The clip went viral instantly. Everyone in the political world understood the code. Even Bernie, her political godfather, was quietly, gently pushing her out the door. On primary night, the results came in with shocking speed. The race was called by the Associated Press before 9 p.m. It wasn't even close. Maria Santos, 54%. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, 38%. A handful of other candidates split the remaining 8%. Santos had won by 16 points, a landslide in a district that Ocasio-Cortez had once owned. Her concession speech was short, bitter, and devoid of grace. "Tonight," she said, her voice tight with rage, "the forces of the corporate establishment have celebrated a great victory. They have defeated a progressive voice. They used a campaign of lies, distortions, and coordinated character attacks to silence someone who dared to challenge their power." She did not congratulate Maria Santos. She did not thank her supporters. She did not take an ounce of responsibility for her own mistakes. "But the movement continues," she concluded, her eyes blazing. "The fight continues, and I will continue to fight for progressive values in whatever capacity I can." She turned and walked off the stage. 2 weeks later, Maria Santos sat for an interview with 60 Minutes. "Do you think the Patel hearing was the turning point in the race?" the interviewer asked. Santos smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Director Patel didn't change anything," she said. "He just revealed what was already there." Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez had been performing for so long and so effectively that people forgot to ask the most basic question. Was she actually doing the job? He asked the question, and she didn't have an answer. But some say his questioning was too aggressive, too personal. Was it sexist? Was it racist? Santos, a Latina woman and an Iraq War veteran, laughed out loud. "That's the card she always plays, isn't it? When you can't defend your record, you claim you're being attacked for your identity. I'm a woman, I'm Latina, I grew up in the Bronx, and I didn't find anything Director Patel did to be sexist or racist. I found it to be something she hasn't experienced in a very long time: accountability." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "Here's what I think really happened. AOC built her entire career on being the one who was combative, the one who called people out, the one who demanded accountability from others. And she got so comfortable, so celebrated in that role, that she simply forgot that she could be held accountable too. Director Patel reminded her. The voters of her district reminded her. And now, we're moving forward with a representative who will actually do the job." 4 months after losing her primary, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez announced she was leaving electoral politics to focus on organizing and movement building from the outside. The translation was obvious. She was starting a progressive media company. Within weeks, she had a multi-million-dollar deal with a major digital network. She had a podcast. She had a YouTube channel. She was a regular guest on all the friendly cable news shows. She was back to doing what she had always done best: performing, talking, and building her brand, just not in Congress. 1 year after the hearing, Kash Patel was a guest on a Fox News program. "Do you have any regrets, Director?" the host asked, "about how you questioned Representative Ocasio-Cortez? Some have accused you of single-handedly destroying her political career." Patel shook his head, a look of mild amusement on his face. "None whatsoever. She came to that hearing with the express purpose of attacking the credibility of the FBI. She made serious, and as we now know, completely false, allegations against our agency. I had not only the right but the duty to question her credibility in return." "But did you destroy her career?" "I didn't destroy anything," Patel said, his voice calm and even. "I asked questions. She was unable to answer them. The voters of her district made their decision based on her record, not based on my questions." He leaned back in his chair. "Here's the thing people seem to forget. Accountability is not an attack. Asking an elected official to defend their actions and their statements is not persecution. And when someone makes their entire political career about calling others out, they cannot be surprised when, eventually, they get called out themselves." The interviewer smiled. "Any final thoughts on AOC?" Patel considered the question for a moment. "She was an immense talent," he said, his tone analytical rather than emotional. "A brilliant communicator. She understood the modern media landscape better than anyone. She knew how to build a following, how to create a narrative." He paused. "But she forgot the most important thing. Eventually, people want results. Eventually, voters want their representatives to actually do things, to pass laws, to solve problems, to deliver for their districts. He looked directly into the camera. You can only perform for so long before the audience wants to see the actual show. And when the curtain finally came up, there was nothing there. In the Bronx, Maria Santos was sworn in as the new representative for New York's 14th Congressional District. In her first 6 months in office, she was the primary sponsor of 2 bills that were signed into law. One provided federal funding for vocational and technical training programs in underserved urban communities. The other streamlined the federal permitting process for small businesses, making it easier for local entrepreneurs to get started. Neither bill made the national news. Neither went viral on Twitter. Neither generated millions of views on YouTube. But in her district, people noticed. At her first anniversary town hall, her 12th since taking office, a woman approached her at the end of the meeting. "I just wanted to thank you," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "My son, he got into that new vocational program you funded. He's training to be an electrician. He wouldn't have had that opportunity before you." Santos smiled. "That's why we're here," she said. "Not for the cameras, for the results." As she left the town hall that night, a local reporter asked if she'd seen AOC's latest podcast, in which she had attacked Santos as a corporate, establishment sellout. Santos just laughed. "Honestly, I don't have time for podcasts," she said. "I'm too busy doing my job." She walked to her car, a slightly dented, used Honda Civic, not a Tesla, and drove home to her 1-bedroom apartment in Queens. No cameras followed her. No one filmed her for Instagram. No one was calling her a rising star or the future of the Democratic Party. But in her district, 23,412 people now had jobs at the new Amazon Logistics and Distribution Center that had finally opened. Not the grand HQ2, but a smaller, more practical facility that had come to the city after AOC had left office. And for the people of the 14th District, that was more than enough. If you found this story compelling, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world.